Hi friends and welcome to Precon Recon, a series where I build a deck out of a precon, basically taking it apart and replacing the commander. So not so much an upgrade, more like a reconfiguration, reconstruction, hence the name. Today I'm going to talk about my first Enchantress deck, which I build based on Virtue and Valor. I'm actually going to build it using Yenna Redtooth Regent as the commander because I really like her vibes and just like, her theming. And I also really love her ability, which lets you duplicate enchantments. Now, obviously, this is going to be an enchantment deck, but also there's going to be an aura sub-theme thanks to Yenna's text box. And to make this deck extra interesting, I'm going to not include anything that isn't an enchantment or land in the 99. Yenna's not an enchantment, but everything else is going to be an enchantment. Yenna's text box is pretty big, but the gist of it is if you pay 2 and tap her at sorcery speed, you can copy an enchantment that you control that you don't already have another one of. It's really powerful in Commander because you don't really often have two of the same enchantments out unless you've already copied them. And in addition to that, the copy isn't legendary, and also, if you copied an aura, you get to untap her and then scry 2, which lets you copy many things on the same turn, even though it's only sorcery speed. This leads us to two different strategies that we can use. We can keep making copies of auras to make our creatures and even lands super big, or we can just copy mediocre or good cards to make them good cards or unfair cards. The precon itself comes with 27 total enchantments, 20 of which are auras, and we're going to keep all of them because they're all good cards. We will, however, toss every other non-land card away. We'll also keep the land base as is, which is a weakness because it's a precon, but we'll talk about that later. In those 27 cards, we have 5 ramp cards, 2 creatures that give our enchantments and auras a cost reduction, Sanctum Weaver, which is going to tap for a ton of mana in an all enchantment deck, and my favorite, the 2 auras that make your lands tap for more. Remember that Yenna is amazing at copying auras, so it's possible to double the effect of them by paying an extra 2 mana on a subsequent turn or even the same turn. 5 ramp cards is not enough though, so we're going to add some more. Even though we don't have access to Cultivate or Kodama's Reach or 3 visits because of our deck restriction, we can just keep adding auras. Green has a bunch of those. These auras all make your lands tap for 1 more mana, either of any color, of the color it produces, or green. Yenna can copy them, and we can get a lot of mana, which we're going to need because we want to copy even more things. Unbridled Growth is not ramp, it's more of mana fixing, but more importantly, it's an amazing card draw engine. Yenna can copy it, and then you can immediately sack that copy to draw a card, and then have Yenna copy it again because you no longer have a copy. So the text on Unbridled Growth, or I guess Yenna, just says pay 2, scry 2, draw a card. Amazing card selection and card draw, repeatable in one. Even though this deck isn't 100% reliant on Yenna, having her on the board makes a huge difference, so we want some protection for her. The precon comes with 3, Bear Umbra, Snake Umbra, and Timely Ward. They're great cards, but because we don't have access to instants like Teferi's Protection, which didn't come with the precon, but I can dream, or other cards that give our commander or any creature indestructible or hexproof, we're going to add some more. Most of the additional protection comes in the form of auras that give a creature, your commander, protection from a color, indestructible, or hexproof. We also have Privileged Position, which gives everything except for itself hexproof, but hey, if you just make a copy of it, then it's also hexproof. That makes single target removal completely ineffective against you. It does cost 7 mana, 5 at one go, and then 2 for the copy, but it's a very powerful protection ability. Because we only took the enchantments from the precon and 20 of them are auras, we're going to need to add some more creatures to round out our deck. Spirited Companion is our good boy who draws us a card. Sithris, which for some reason isn't in the precon, even though she's not that expensive, is a staple in Celestia Enchantress decks, and we definitely need her. Heliod, God of the Sun, he's gonna be a indestructible giant beater who can maybe also generate tokens. Speaking of token generators, we have a roster of the Ennis Web, a great enchantment creature that generates spiders, Goshen Tie of Shared Purpose, which, yes, does give us spirits, especially if we have copies of it, but it and its green counterpart are in here in part as removal magnets. People don't like seeing copies of shrines, so they'll try to swords to plowshare it, and I rather that swords goes towards the Goshen ties as opposed to say our commander or a Jukai naturalist. Finally, we have Sandworm Convergence, which is a mediocre card, but if you have two of them, that's 10 power every turn and also 10 toughness. That's pretty amazing, and also it means that flyers really can't attack you, and it'll take multiple removal spells for a flyer based deck to get through your defenses. I played this against a fairy deck, and the fairy deck player was not happy. And finally, we have two auras that are pretty expensive but copyable and also gives you a whole bunch of saplings. Remember that auras can enchant enemy creatures, so you can put that Pollen Brightwings on an opponent's creature and have them generate saplings for you, though you may get hit with it, so, may not be a good idea. Finally, we have the Fall of Lord Condor, who is a creature, but also he's there as removal, because oh boy, removal is a problem in an all enchantment deck. The precon does come with Camwith transformation, so you can make something into an elk, and then make a second thing into an elk. Great removal spell, but not enough. So we're gonna add a few more auras, Candle Trap and Cooped Up. They don't really remove a creature, but the important thing is you can use them as very expensive exile spells that are reusable because, say, you make a copy of Candle Trap, you sack one of them, you can make a copy of the other one again. Pretty expensive once again, but reusable. Creature exile is pretty nice, I guess. Yeah, we don't have Swords to Plowshares here. Ossification is another recent card, and it gets rid of a thing. We also have cards like Borrow Time, which also gets rid of a thing. Prayer of Binding, same deal. They target every non-land permanent, so that's really good. Prayer of Binding is literally the only flash speed removal in this deck. Once again, removal is the biggest weakness in this deck because all enchantment. We also have Grasp of Fate, which is like Borrow Time, except you do it to everyone. So it's like a board wipe? Question mark? Besides the standard creatures that let you draw a card when an enchantment enters the battlefield or is cast, we also have a couple card draw spells from the precon. Snake Umbra lets the creatures enchanted basically get you cards when it deals damage, and Songbird's Blessing lets you get free auras on attack triggers. Songbird's Blessing is especially good if you play it on an opponent's creature that has a very strong attack trigger. For example, an Alesha. Songbird's Blessing doesn't actually make the creature any bigger or better, and well, are they just gonna not attack with their creature that their entire deck is based on, so you don't get a free card? No, they're gonna attack with it, and they're gonna hate you, but you're gonna get that free card every time. A couple cards that I put in for card draw, well, Unbridled Growth, we already talked about that. There's also Season of Growth. Basically, whenever you cast an aura that targets a creature, you draw a card. And that's a lot of the time in this deck, so that's really nice, especially for a 2-drop. Card draw isn't actually that important in this deck, I've found, because you're really spending your mana copying things as well. Since every card is a twofer, you really don't need to refill your hand as much as most other decks. Right now, the lands in this deck are just from the precon. I may have added one or two cheap tap lands in there for mana fixing, but it's really just a crappy precon package. Except this time around, the precon came with a Hall of Helios Generosity, which was like a $10 card before the precon dropped. So that's really nice, and that's a really good card. But other than that, the land base is budget. It's not, there's no other way to describe it. I will need to upgrade this at some point now that I played with the deck a bit and I really like it, and I'm gonna just put in some cool, better lands. But right now, this is not the best land base. So this deck wins through combat damage. You can sort of go wide sometimes if you get all the token generators and you duplicate them and you get a whole bunch of tokens, but most of the time you're going to end up having several very large creatures instead. And those very large creatures usually have things like Ethereal Armor or Mantle of the Ancients, both of which are from the Precon, that buffs your creatures for +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, which in this deck is a whole heck of a lot. You also have Michiko's Reign of Truth, which does that temporarily, and then flips into Portrait of Michiko, which does that permanently to herself. So you get these giant creatures, and you can just swing in for massive damage. And then we have these giant auras from the precon, like Giant Inheritance and Angelic Destiny, that just make your creatures big. More importantly, it gives them trample and or flying so they can get through. Daybreak Coronet is another good card that comes with the precon. Its drawback is that you have to use it on an enchanted creature, but you're going to have enchanted creatures in this deck. It's a 2-mana card that gives +3/+3 for Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. You can cast it and copy it for a total of 4 mana. Speaking of copy, remember that Yenna untaps herself when she copies an aura. So what you can do is you can, in your first main phase, copy auras onto Yenna and then attack with her because she's untapped to essentially have an Alpha Strike or major commander damage come out of seemingly nowhere. So this deck, while it's not really a Voltron deck, can become a Voltron deck as either a last-ditch effort or just a different strategy if regular combat damage isn't going to do the trick. One of the things that Rebel, who is an amazing deck builder, you should go watch her videos, one of the things that she says in her CEDH deck text is that you want to put in cards that make your commander unfair. Well, these are the 4 cards that makes the commander that makes this deck unfair. First, we have the token doublers. Making 1 copy of something is nice. Making 2 copies is busted. If you somehow can get both of these on the board, or if you can make a copy of one of these, you end up getting 5, 7, 8, some ridiculous amount of copies whenever you use Yenna's ability. So yeah, you don't need these for the deck to pop off, but when one of them pops in and other players realize what they're gonna do, the game is gonna end pretty soon from that on. It's gonna be fun for everyone involved for some definition of fun. 1 Karmic Justice is nice, but 2 Karmic Justices, I mean, are you really going to remove any of my non-creature stuff, any of my auras, or my many, many enchantments, if it means that I can destroy 2 of your things when you do that? 2 of your things, including lands? 1 Karmic Justice is nice, 2 Karmic Justices is a little unfair. And finally, Unnatural Growth. Having 1 of these is cool, but having 2 of these essentially quadruples all of your creatures' power and toughness, so even your saplings become 4/4. You only need 7 mana, which I guess is a lot, but remember that this deck has 10 ramp cards, all of which can be copied. So yeah, 7 mana isn't actually a lot in this deck by the time you want to end the game, and just being able to quadruple everything's power toughness after tossing a +3 or +4 or +5 aura on them does make for some really nice finishes. Even though this deck is capable of doing some really cool things, it's not that powerful because of that enchantment only build restriction. We don't have access to efficient removal. Our interaction speed is basically terrible. Even our commander is sorcery speed only, so really it's a hey, I guess I'm tapped out every time it's not my turn kind of deck, even more so than general Celestia decks, because I'm not holding up 2 mana for a frog or anything like that. And also, with our access to artifacts, we don't have Arcane Signet or Soul Ring or any of the other good mana rocks. This deck is not a 7. It's not very powerful. It's not remotely close to competitive, but it's really fun to play. I am thinking about relaxing the restriction and adding in 7 instants and sorceries, 7 being another Tam Lin reference, just like the name of the deck, to make this deck play a little smoother and so I can actually interact and not just sit out 3/4 of the game. Regardless, though, I am going to be adding some better lands to the deck because, well, Precon, why? Why do you come with such terrible lands? Except the Hall of Heliod's generosity, I guess. Thank you so much for watching, and if you would like to interact with this content, let me know what instant or sorcery you would put into this deck if you were going to put 7 of them in. Teferi's protection being a given, because maybe then this deck won't wipe to a single farewell. Anyway, farewell.